I mean, one of the things that's, thanks, Jim, I forgot about that. One of the things that's been most interesting to me about today is how often the word free drops out of the conversation and just becomes the market, right? As if there's one way of thinking about the market, and the market means one thing, and the alternative to the market is the other thing, whatever that is, right? Whether it's, you know, value judgments or, and I have to say that, I mean, this is partly because it was a commitment of my project, but I also think it comes up to me from the history. I see the paradigms as much less airtight and much more fluid, which is not to say there's not a dominant. I mean, I think the fact that free can drop out and that we think of the market as a shorthand for liberal, presently institutionalized market is itself indicative. But doing history, I see improvisation as constant, right, and experimentation as constant. And I think that did line up with the panels today in the sense of how complicated choice is, right? It wasn't like choice was either good or bad, it was complicated, if I understood, especially that, whatever that was, the third panel that we had. So, and then the question becomes, you know, when is there a shift? I think this is a profound question. Maybe Gramsci had it right. I mean, I'm less persuaded than ever of causation and more of some kind of retroactive moment in which coherence is created around a particular, you know, set of events and ideas, which then makes it look as if, you know, we've got a new coherence. So I don't know what that's.
Bernard, do you want to take that up, Bill?
Sure.
A couple of thoughts, because I'm spending a lot of my time. Well, first of all, I'm not sure what the relationship here between history, political theory, genealogies, etc. So the role that history plays in my work is more a question of trying to figure out when discourses change, right? When a discourse becomes dominant, right? And so I think you can do the same thing today and listen very closely to what people are saying. And it's fascinating because it's fascinating to listen closely because it seems as if even though we've gone through this, it was fascinating to hear Dick Posner use the word depression, right? That's a fascinating use of that word, right? But at the same time, there's so much resistance to that idea. So, you know, you have this passage from Geithner, right? This is, you know, after the $70 billion, right? We have a financial system that is run by private shareholders, managed by private institutions, and we like to do our best to preserve that system, right? A financial system which at this point, you know, Citibank were the major shareholders of Citibank, right? So, right, and then you have the language of temporary nationalization, resistance to notions of nationalization. I was talking earlier about the word pre-privatization, which seems to be, that was Krugman in Krugman's op-ed. He was kind of picking up on that rhetoric as a way to try and explain what's going on here. So I think that, you know, you can do it historically and see how discourse has shifted over time, or you can do exactly the same thing right now and try and track exactly all the language that's being used.
Yeah, this is you can do it right now because we happen to be at quite a crisis. Michael, did you want in, or did
it's hard to jump in after if the other panelists want to build on that? I was just going to note as a sports law person to give an example. We've been talking about the malleability of the frames. I also think it's interesting when you look at how people have multiple frames, and by that, when in my sports law class, I'll always say, "How many of you support a salary cap?" And most people will support it. Then I will say, well, how many of you would support a cap where you can only make $5 million a year for yourself? And they're vehement opposition. And I always wonder, why are they approaching these questions differently? Is it because they believe in equity for sports teams but not for themselves? And why is that? Why are they comfortable with equality in one context, but in a general sense, they're totally against it? And I guess that was my only addition, would be say, in addition to the malleability, to look at how people seem to have different frames depending upon what the question is.
Tamara.
Yeah, I just was struck, particularly with your presentation. Now you've given me a new gender category besides the ones I was using. But how difficult it's going to be to change our criteria or to change the frameworks when, you know, we have this sort of 360, 24/7 kind of advertising environment, which doesn't just sell the thing that it purports to sell, it also sells the ideology of choice is better, you know, and if you just track the language in a lot of ads for just any number of things, I mean, prescription drugs, freedom, take control of your life, you know, all of this stuff, advertisers have known this forever. The implicit association test, I mean, the idea that you will associate the brand with something warm and fuzzy. I mean, I used this Gerber case with parents suing over the nutritional components of some Gerber food, and it's perfect from the manufacturer's standpoint, right? Because the audience can't remember anything specific, so they have no tort claim. You said this, and I relied on it, and so I've been damaged. All they could remember was precisely enough to buy Gerber, this kind of warmer, general, fuzzy, like I like it better, but I can't remember anything specific about it. And it strikes me that all of this association is part of what constructs some of the things that I worry a little bit about, like, are we essentializing like the difference between genders in the choice, or, you know, families and the family kind of, like, the explanations that people give about why they didn't leave, it strikes me like because they didn't have a car is a good reason, and, you know, like, or because you're not in a position to be able to make those choices, and it's hard to, if we focus on some of these things as essential, we might be studying the wrong thing, because it is a dynamic.
I think these things do change. It's hard to imagine now, but 30 years ago, people didn't organize the world in quite this monolithical way. You know, Margaret Thatcher said there is no alternative. Well, no one thought that was true in the 1960s. Everyone seems to have thought that was true in the last 20 years. So this is an attempt to naturalize a human institution. Of course there's an alternative. And the reason people were willing to accept that there's no alternative is it seemed like every day in every way the people who mattered were getting richer and richer. Well, as Rahm Emanuel said, you should never let a crisis go to waste. It seems to me this is a time when people can revisit and remind themselves that they had a different set of assumptions, that government does good things, at least as often as it does bad ones. There are alternatives. And what seems unimaginable now may seem inevitable in 10 years. I mean, it seems to me that's the most important thing that needs to be challenged is the naturalness. Now, we all know that it's unnatural, but most people outside this room don't know that it's unnatural. And if you think it's natural, it doesn't need to be defended. If you think it's unnatural, then it does need to be defended, and it's not so easy to defend these days. So it seems to me this is a cause for optimism as we get up on the unemployment line.
So as I understand, our first project, we're going to go after the naturalness of the system, and then we're going after Gerber and the fuzziness. That sounds right. I saw Gretchen. Yeah.
Thanks. I just have a quick question. Drawing from the really wonderful, thank you, presentation about class and different responses, and then thinking about your presentation, John, have there been studies that would look at both advertisements and also political language among Putin supporters in Russia? Just, I mean, that question.